Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll learn Masechtas Zevachim Daf Zayin. We are going to begin on Zayin Amud Aleph, about 9 lines from the top by the 2 dots, Itmar. With regarding a Toda, in which we know there's a carbon Toda, which is a Thanksgiving offering, which is accompanied with breads, 40 breads, Sheshachto Hashem Todas Chavero. Now you did have in mind that it was a Toda, but it was for your friend. Says Rashi, Lo sheshachta almanas shischaper ba misheinu baleha. So basically, that was shechted on condition to be mechaper for someone else who's not the owner. So that's not what we're talking about. Neinze shini bala mishini kaidish shahaisel l'ruvein taida, that Reuven had a carbon, the Shimon taida cheres. And Shimon had a different carbon. V'shachan todaso shel zeh, l'shem todaso shel zeh. So he brought it for the other person. B'sheichet chatas chel l'shem chatas dam. It was perhaps for different mistakes. So in this ksher v'oil l'balam, it works. If you shini kaidish ein kan, it's not a problem at all. So even though you brought a toida for the sake of another toida, but it was not yours, it was for his friend, that's kosher. So Rabbi Omer Kshera, Rav Chesed Omer Psula. So Rabbi Omer Kshera, toida shem toida nishchata. It was shechted for the right reasons. It was shechted for a toida. Rav Chesed Omer Psula l'shum shlomim didei nishchata v'inon. It needs to be shechted for you. And therefore, Rashi says, well, also labalim, the shini kaidishu. This is a shini kaidish because it was for the wrong person. And therefore, it needs to be shechted for him, nishchat b'inon. So, Amar Rabba minamino. So how do I know that, in fact, such a carbon would be kosher? So, the Sanya, it says in the Pasuk, Ubasar Zevach Taida Shlomov, which we've had before, with regard to the Taida Shlomov, B'yom Karbanu Yachel, you can eat it on the day that you sacrifice it. Yinechmenu ad Biker. Don't leave it over until the morning, although it's nicer. B'yim Neder on the Dava Zevach Karbanu B'yom Hikribu as Zivcha Yachel. So you have to eat it that day. Umecharas. And the next day, V'hanaisim Menu Yachel, and again, the leftovers, there's a din nicer. Anyway, so that's the entirety of the pasuk. So pasuk is about the shlamav. Why does it say shlamav? B'yom hakrivu as siv chay v'gomer. So it says shlamav is coming to tell you that it has to be for that individual. So it says Rashi, l'shem shlomim didei be'inan. Okay. Since it says Shlamav, anyway, so he makes the diak from the word Shlamav, his shloimim, his carbon. Actually, you learn out from here that if you have a carbon taida and you check it thinking it was a shlomim, it works, as we said before. Shlomim shenishchel l'shem taida b'sua. So my difference is what's the difference? Because taida creates shlomim. The word shlomim is more of an umbrella term, and a toda is also called a shlomim. So therefore, if you have a toda and you had in mind shlomim, it works because a toda is also called a shlomim. However, the other way around, not. Being shlomim creating taida. So if you actually had a shlomim and you thought it's a taida, so taida is more exclusive, and therefore would not work. Shlomim l'shem taida psula. If you have a shlomim for the sake of a taida, that's what it's possible, which is mashma. Ha taida l'shem taida kshera. So this is the raya to him, to Rabba, that if you have a taida, it was l'shem taida, even though it was l'shem taida chavero, it still works. So ma'il abdachavre. Even though it was of his friend, it still works, and therefore it's a raya to Rabba. Lo, didei. It's talking about your own taida. In other words, why does it work? Because you shefted a taida, thinking it was a taida, and it was yours. That's why it works. Even though maybe it wasn't for the for that reason, right? Maybe you had another toda, but nonetheless, it's you. There's no shinya balam, and it's still a taida. But maybe when it comes to this case, where you originally had a taida and you shechted it l'shem taidas chavero, maybe it won't work. Of the chavri mai psula. So adatani shlomim l'shem taida psula. Why does it start talking about if you took a shlomim and you did it for the sake of a taida, it doesn't work? So listening taida l'shem taida, mention even a taida l'shem taida sometimes doesn't work. If it's the chavre, the koshkin shlomim l'shem taida. So why does just mention that? So shlomim l'shem taida did tzrichle. We still need to teach us this, even though you're right. Maybe it would make more sense to teach you that a taida l'shem taida the chavre is also not good. So why do we mention this case? Because you would think mid the taida kurei shlomim shlomim nami kurei taida. You would think that it works. It's like a two-way street. That just like if you have a toda and you think I'm bringing a shlomim, it works. So maybe the same thing works the other way around because they're like almost like synonymous words. So the chiddush is that if you shechted a shlomim l'shem taida, that it won't work. That was the whole chiddush. But again, it doesn't prove us when it comes to someone who shechs the taida l'shem taidas chavero whether it works. Okay, so it's a machlokas. Omer Rabba, chatas shachta l'shem chatas kshera. You have a chatas, and it was shechted also for a chatas. So in that case, it's kosher. So why wouldn't it be? So Rashi says, "Kingan chatas chaylev sheshachta l'shem chatas dam kshera ve'osaloi." It works because it's this. Let's say a person did two violations. They ate chaylev, non-kosher fats, and they also ate blood, which are both a chiyuv chatas. And the guy brought a carbon chatas, which is his, thinking that this was actually a chatas, which it is, but it wasn't for the right one. So nonetheless, we say chatas shedach l'shem chatas kshera. However, l'shem oil psula. However, if you brought a chatas thinking it was an oil, then it doesn't work. So my taima, why? What's the distinction? Because the pasuk says, "V'samech es yodo al rosh hachatas," that you do smicha on the chatas. V'shachat oisa l'chatas on rachmana. You shecht it for it as a chatas. Chatas Hashem chatas nishchata. So if it was a chatas Hashem chatas, it works. However, l'shem oila is psula. It's only that it says in the pasuk v'shachat oisa. So it has to be a chatas l'shem chatas. Okay, fine. So that is the explanation. All right, let's keep going. The oimer rava chatas sheshachta al mish mechuyev chatas psula. Let's say you have a chatas and you shechted it for someone else. It's a shinui balam for someone else that's mechuyev chatas. In that situation, we say it's psula. Unlike the case of a taida l'shem taidas chavero, when it comes to a chatas, no. There's an issue of shinui balam, and a thought that I'll do zrika of the dam for this person, but as an oila to a chiyuv, it won't work because it was really a chiyuv chatas, so it's not good. So again, chatas sheshachta al mishum chiyuv chatas psul. Even if it was for the same carbon, right? However, al mishum chiyuv oila kshera. So we end up saying even though they're different. So in this situation, someone was a chatas and you confuse it with an oil, it would work. So my taima, the chipra love a love loyal chavero. It says in the pasuk, v'yaskol chelbo yaktir hamizbecha. You have to be maktir the chelev on the mizbeach. Kechelev zemach hashamim, just like a shlom. And v'chipra love a kayin michatasa v'nislachlei. So it says, and there'll be a kapara. So what do we see? A love. V'lo chaver, only on him, but not his friend. So what do we see? Chaver diomadi today. B'mechuyev kapara kamaisu. The whole issue is if it's one chatas to your friend's chatas, because that's where the pasuk is speaking about. However, achatas to an oila, so that the pasuk isn't talking about, and therefore it's not a problem. Says Rashi, Al misha mechuyev chatas b'shini balam al manas lizrek damu l'shem chavero hamechuyev chatas kamoiso. However, if you have an improper machshava b'shash shchita that I'm going to do zrikas hadam for this other guy as an ola, so then it's considered to be it is considered to be kosher. Okay. All right. So as you saw before, because it's not something which is not the mina, is not churba, doesn't destroy it. Okay. Anyway, so that's a pretty big chiddush. The Yomi Rabbi chatas sheshachto al mi she'ein mechuyev klum psula. If you, let's say you have a chatas, you shechta for someone who has absolutely no chiyuv whatever, that definitely doesn't work. She'ein locha adam yisrael she'ein mechuyev aseh. Because there's no person who's didn't do something wrong. Hilchah says Rashi, mechuyev kapar kamoisahu. So it's considered to be like he is mechuyev just like this other guy. The Yomi Rabbi chatas machaperes al chavi aseh. The chatas actually mechaper for aseh, not just an ola, but also the chatas will. The kavachemer. Chibi Kris says mechaperes al chavi aseh kosher kain. So it's interesting that a chatas works for more to be mechaper for bigger sins. So then certainly it'll be mechaper for asehs as well. So memra, you come to tell you the basmi nahu. There must be therefore that since chatas also is mechaper for an aseh, just like an ola, so therefore chatas and ola are considered to be basmina, right? They're considered to be really the same thing. But if a person violates an aseh, which is apparently only by an oil is a mechaper, not by a chatas, right? Kshera. That's what we can do in the base. So Gemara says, well, mikvah will mechapra, mekufia mechapra. It's not like entirely a kapara. However, there is like on the surface, like it's floating, a kapara. In other words, a chatas could be mechapra in oil at least superficially or surface on a surface level, like it's floating. Says Rashi, Hilkach al misha mochayev oila kshera. Kivan de hifresh oila shaychi kul aseh shbiyadu oila. Besulo shech chatas gabe. El b'mishul hifresh klum ve'averas aseh biyadu, and he did the vera shech chatas gabe. Then the chatas could cancel that out. Deal havi mochayev chatas mechaper aseh mekufya, because it does somewhat on the surface mechaper for an aseh. Hilkach chayil shmei achatas shenishchatel l'shmoi l'sulai. So again, a chatas for the shem chatas will passel it. So this guy is also going to be it's also going to passel it. But if it's someone who had designated an oila, so therefore in that case, that machshava will not passel. Okay. All right, let's see a couple questions here. Question, let's see, TA17. Got that wrong too. If you have a chatas and you shechted it with intention for someone who's not muchayiv at all, or v'al mish muchayiv oil kshera. But if it was an oil which is not at all chatas, not ber hatam b'zeh. What's the logic in this? So as we said, because a chatas is mechaper even on the surface, it's mechaper for an aseh, and therefore it's considered to be bas minah, because no yid in Yisrael is not mechayiv an oil. However, someone who already made a neder to bring an oila, so therefore the aseh is only on the ola. It's not on a chatas, and therefore it's like removed. And therefore, because of that, if you had a machshava on a chatas, you had the machshava of an oila, so then it will still be mechaper. If it's someone else's oil, I should say. Yomi Rabbi, oila sheshachta shalishma. So you have a carbon oil shechted without the right intentions. Also, lizrek dama shelo yishma. And we had this before. Just because you did one thing wrong doesn't mean you continue to do things wrong. Iboy sema kroi, iboy sema svara. It can be learned out through a pasuk, or it can be learned out through logic. Just out of curiosity, when this was brought down in Bays, it said iboy sema kroi, iboy sema svara. Iboy sema svara. No, iboy sema svara, iboy sema kra. And here it says, I don't know why, iboy sema kra, iboy sema svara. Okay. Iboy sema kra, mitzvah masachat tishmor. As we saw before. Really, it's a neder, and then all of a sudden and then all of a sudden it's a nedava, because since you had the wrong machshava for a nedava, you can still bring it now. As the nedava, iboy sema svara mishum deshani ba v'chul. Just kideresh pirka. So we saw in the beginning of this parak, this drasha, that it works, because the fact is, if you made a mistake, you shouldn't continue to make mistakes. Okay, which is a beautiful philosophical concept as well. So let's say you have a carbon oila that's bol acher misa. Says Rashi, shemesu baleha. So the owner died, and all of a sudden the Yarshim want to be makrabit. Now, we know when it comes to a chata shemesu baleha, it's killed. When it comes to an oila, to an asham, we say it's grazes until it gets a mum, and then it becomes an oila. What happens when it comes to an oila? So shachta b'shini kodesh. So let's say you shechted it, but b'shini kodesh, right? And you so psula b'shini balam sheir dein balam achmisa. So if you had a different intention for a different person, it's kosher, because there's no violation of shini balim, because the original guy died, so he's not here. So you can't say, oh, he didn't have the intention of the right person, because the person is not alive. So there's no issue of shini balim when it comes to bringing oila for the wrong person. But when it comes to shini kodesh, that you thought instead of an oila it was a shlamim or something, so that would passel it. It's not true. The Yorshim themselves, as we said, whether they inherited or not, that's really questionable. It seems like they're not Yerush, as we saw before, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to bring a mincha. But the point is that they are considered to be Yorshim, and therefore maybe it is shaykh, some element of Shinoi Baalim. So Amalei Ravashu Rav Pinchas Bered Ravami Davka Kaimer Mar Yesh Baal Be'achamisa. Is he being specific that that's the case? Uboyle Suyi Oila Achriti, and therefore you actually have to bring another oila in the case of Shinoi Baalim. Again, it's not the guy. The man died, and now the Yorshim are bringing this carbon, and when they're bringing this carbon, it was Shinoi Baalim. Is it true that you have to actually bring another carbon? Odilma Di'ika Kama Asay Gabe Mechapra. That may be that if the Yorish has another assay, it's mechaper for them. So Malay dafka kamina. No, it is being dafka, which means the Taka would have to apparently bring another carbon. V'yomer Rabba, oyla doirinhi. The truth is, an oyla is considered like a gift. Says Rashi, enu ba l'chaper l'asay kapar mamish. Even though he said that an oyla is mechaper for mitzvah asay, mitzvah a lot of hanitik asay, but technically, if you don't, it's not like a chiyuv to bring, like a chatas or an asham. El acher shekapara hatashuva al hasei he bal lahakabolas panim ka'adim shesarach b'melech, like a person who's sinned against the king. Beritza alidei praklitin shabol kabel panim maybe darin biyadai. So when you want to go see the king, you give him a gift because you made a mistake. So to be able to like almost appease him, you give a gift. So that's what an ol is. So hechanami, either like a tshuva. So let's say the guy just never did tshuva and you brought an oila, so that's zevach rishayim toeva. If you did not say and you didn't do tshuva, so that oila, you can't bring that carbon because you're a rasha. The ika tshuva, if you did tshuva, we already know the sanya overall mitzvah saseh v'shav loy zoz mishamad shemoichano. Ella Shmamina Darinhu. It's a raya, it has to be a gift because you already achieved. If you didn't do tshuva and Zevach Hashem Toeva, this is question 12 actually. How do we know it's a gift? Because again, if you didn't do tshuva, it's Zevach Hashem Toeva, and if you did tshuva, so then you already received tshuva anyway, without having to bring the carbon anyway. So therefore, an oil must be just a darin. Okay, chatas el mi machaper oil alach darin siman. Tanya mihachi yom Rab Shimon chatas lama ba. What's the purpose of a chatas? Lama ba lachaper. Of course, it's for kapara. El lama ba lifnei oila. Why do we bring the chatas before the oil? We typically will bring the chatas first because le par kalit shenichnas, when the defender enters vritza par kalit nichnas darin achareha. First he tries to achieve atonement, and then afterwards he'll give a gift. So that's the reason why typically a chatas makes more sense, because first you made a mistake, and therefore you need to own up to your mistake, and then after the chatas, the sin has been forgiven, then you can give a gift. Okay, chutz min a pesach v'hachatas. So cool. So now we're going to go back to the beginning of our Mishnah, machlokas, but our Mishnah says that if you had a improper machshava, it was shlo l'shma. So let's say you had an oila and you thought it was a shlomim, so we say it's kosher, but it's not oila shem balim. However, it's not when it comes to a carbon pesach, specifically during its zman, during the time from chatzos of Erev Pesach on. That is when a carbon is a pesach. The rest of the year, that carbon pesach is translated into shlomim. So pesach min nolan. D'chsiv shemer sachodesh ha'aviv yasisa pesach sheyukol hasiyaisa l'shem pesach, tells you that everything must be l'shma. So therefore we say it has to be l'shma, and if it's not, then it's possible, and therefore there's no point in moving forward. Ashkan shini kaidish, shini balam non. So d'chsiv, it says v'yamartim zevach pesach, which we also say at the Haggadah. Yamartem Zevach Pesach, right? So it says Zevach Pesach. Why does it say Zevach Pesach? We said the same drasha by Zevach Shlomim. So Zevach Pesach, the fact that it says Zevach comes to tell you that it must be this Zvicha, Hu Shetei Zvicha L'Shem Pesach. So it means that it must be for a carbon pesach, which again seemingly is another case of shinu kaidish, which it is. But imenu inyan, shinu kaidish, because we already learned it out, that there's an issue of shinu kaidish, that if you have the wrong intention for the wrong carbon, it's a pesach, carbon pesach, and you thought it was something else, it's possible. So tune in l'shinu bal. So ashkan lemitzvah. I can understand this is like a chatchila deal. La'akim, how do we know it's mamish ma'akiv if you do it shol shema? So Merkrab is about the Pesach Hashem Okecha v'goymer. So Maskav Rav Safra, hi, this pasuk of Zavachtel Hachudasa. Hamaboy Leil Rav Nachman, Dear Rav Nachman, Rav Rabua. He learns out a totally separate drush from here. Menayin lo moiser Pesach shekarv shlomim. How do we know when it comes to the leftovers of the carbon Pesach, the monies, that you should be makriv it as a shlomim? And this we have numerous places. Specifically, Rashi explains, she'avad. You had the carbon Pesach, you lost it, and you achieved kapara with another animal, right? You brought another carbon Pesach, and then you found the first one. So now what do you do with that carbon, or with that money? So the din is that it's a shlomim. When it comes to the carbon Pesach, you can bring sheep, you can even bring cattle. 1 second. We know the carbon Pesach has to be either a sheep or a goat, right? Like a lamb or goat. It can't be cattle. You can't bring a bull or something. So Makan lo meiser Pesach she'il davar haba min atzayin min abakar u'min shlomim, right? It must be. It's talking about a shlomim. But anyway, that's a beautiful vort. It's one of the things that we went out from this pasuk. But apparently, if we already learned this out from the pasuk, it can't be used to tell us Shinas Balam. So Elam Rav Safra Rav Zavat Pesach Kid Rav Nachman. So that drasha of Rav Nachman, that's what we went out from this pasuk. That it has the status of a shlomim. Shomer Sachadesh Aviv Mitzvah Mishini Kodesh Yamartem Zevach Pesach Mishini Balam Mitzvah. Okay, so we have the pasuk of Zevach Pesach to Shinui Balam is la mitzvah. But how do we know it's la'akev? Who is la'akev? The fact that it says who, so that is la'akev. Bein hacha v'hacha. For this and this, as Rashi, b'shini kodesh shini balam. The who mashma atervayu kishu asi kimitzvasai mashma. It has to be done exactly the right way, and therefore it's excluding if it was not done. You had the wrong intention of the wrong carbon, the shini kodesh, or the wrong person, shini bal. So that's when it comes to the shchita, shar avodas menon, which we spent a few blot ago. We went through all this. They maybe can't learn out shchita from everything else. Shchita is kosher bizarre, etc. And nashim. So hoyil the goli. Since it's revealed. The pasuk reveals it has to be lishma. So therefore, everything has to be lishma. Apparently, that's how we read that. Rav Ashi no hoyil ben goli amrina. We don't say that. El avodas manon. How do we know the other avodos? Dichsiv, as we said before, zayis hatayru oila mincha v'goymer. So the pasuk mentions all the karbonos, right? Zayis taras, and talks about oila mincha chatas asham miluyim zevach hashlomim v'tanya b'yom tzavasoy es bnei Yisrael l'hakriv es karbonehem ze b'chor u'maiser pesach hikishu akasel v'shlomim. So we can connect it to a shlomim. Mashlomim bein shuni kodesh bein shuni balam. We already said is being in the mitzvah that it needs to be done properly. Af koil bein shuni kodesh bein shuni balam mitzvah. Ukasha shlomim, and just like shlomim, mashlomim bein zvicha is bein shar avodos lo chalakta behen mitzvah. It doesn't even make a difference, and not just by the shchita, it's by all the other avodos, by the catching of the blood, the kabbalah sadam, the halacha, and the zrika. Af Pesach lo tichuk bein zvicha shar avodos la'akev misham shenemar hu bezvicha leinu la'akev ela hu lamali. So what is who coming to tell us? Kedesanya nemer bepesach hu b'shchita la'akev. It says we are in Param Pesach that the shchita is going to be ma'akev. Avul asham loy nemer boy who. It doesn't say that by asham. Ela li'achar hakadar simurim. The only time it's mentioned who is davka when it comes to the bringing of the sacrificial parts. And there's no way you can say that the sacrificial parts must be lishma and it's ma'akev, because who atzmo shlo hekdiri murin kosher. We already know, and we said this before, that it's still going to be kosher when it comes to the sacrificial parts, even though they're not brought. So certainly it was not lishma. So who by Pesach is to contrast it to asham, that it isn't ma'akev by asham. Says to asham, it's by a place which is the Emereim, the sacrificial parts, that isn't ma'akev. If the asham is not done lishma, it only says who by the part of the avoda which isn't ma'akev. So therefore, you can't learn out that when it comes to asham. Okay, we're gonna stop there. See question 13. What do you mean? How can you actually have bakar? So again, the answer is a couple answers here. But when it comes to Ma'aseh Pesach, so it could be it's a shlomim, and of course a shlomim can be brought also from bakar. Okay, TA 17. I did already. Fine, to make a distinction between someone who was never mechuyev b'davar, but he probably did not say. So therefore, because it doesn't work, because it's linked to the chatas. Okay. Okay. We didn't do another question for TA. Let's look at TB 19. Omarava chatas sheshachta al mi shemechuyev oila kshera al mi she'enu mechuyev klum psul ber tabazes. This is the same thing as TA 17, which I got wrong there. Let's see if I got TB 19 correct. I accidentally crossed it out. That was a mistake. Let's see what I wrote. So Mistama Gamo Isadaber Shul. Okay, I'm glad I crossed that out. So, Efsher Shaloi. It's impossible that he didn't do some type of chet, ba'aseh. B'chatas is mechaper, b'kufya, Bekufya, right, with an aleph, bekufya, right, like partially, or what I say, on a surface level, as I say. But an oila, but when it comes to an oila, so in that situation, who hifrish, right? You were mafresh it, dafka, l'kaparas asay. Even though again, it's a doirain, below l'chatos. That's not exactly what it is, but the idea is that if you already designated an oila, so therefore you did it because of the asay, and because of that, the chatas that's brought with shame oil will still be kosher because it wasn't linked to it. Because the asay is not going to be mechaper really when it comes to that particular asay, because you already have the ola, which was going to cover it. That was the purpose of the ola. But if a person has no karbanos linked to it, so then he'll automatically be connected to the chatas, in which does cause some peripheral, some type of surface level forgiveness on an asay, and therefore because of that, if you have a machshava for such an individual who has no carbon, then in fact it will be psula. Okay.